Morning, everybody. I can see that there are still a few people joining, so we'll just spend a few more seconds, a minute, just to make sure that everybody has made their way into the session. Numbers are still ticking up ever so gradually. Still going up. It's tense watching it. It's like watching the count go up. So I think it looks like it's leveled off. So we'll make a start, I think, to this morning's CaBA Benefits webinar. Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm Nick Paling. I'm going to be starting off and hosting this webinar this morning. I will introduce myself in a second, and I'm joined today by Rob Collins from the Rivers Trust, who is a key person in both the CaBA Benefits group, but also obviously as the CaBA Secretariat, and Emily Howard-Williams from there she is, from West Country Rivers Trust, who does a huge amount of work in the background on the CaBA monitoring and reporting process. And you'll be hearing from Rob and Emily a bit later on in the session. So we're still going up the numbers. It's obviously people fighting their way through the ice, albeit virtually in Zoom this morning. So I will share my screen. Okay, so hopefully, again, you can all see the slides now. They're very bright. So I was thinking just this morning about how many times we've held webinars of this type for CaBA now. I think, if memory serves correctly, I think it was about 2014 or 2015 when we first got involved in CaBA webinars, and we started talking about monitoring and evaluation and benefits of CaBA particularly. This presentation that I'm going to give this morning to begin with is very, very similar to the one I gave a year ago, but I think it's really useful, hopefully, to go through and cover off some of the background information that has led into the CaBA monitoring and evaluation process that you all so positively and enthusiastically complete every year. So the agenda is there. A few opening words from me, and then essentially two hopefully fairly short presentations from myself. I'm going to talk about the importance of monitoring and evaluation in general, and some of the theories and concepts that we use in designing evaluation and monitoring processes. I'm also then going to give you a presentation which is a bit of a self-indulgent ramble through the history of CaBA, but also particularly from the point of view of understanding the benefits of CaBA, the value of CaBA, and how we have tried over the years to assess, evaluate the benefits of CaBA and showcase that to as many different audiences as we can. Then I'm going to hand over to Rob, who is going to give a summary of the impact and value of the CaBA monitoring and evaluation process, how it's been used, who it's been shown to, how it's been used to celebrate and showcase the value and benefits of CaBA, which is obviously why we do it. Then we'll have a short break, and then after the break, Emily is going to take you through the CaBA reporting process and the form that as it exists now, it's changing. Not that the questions aren't changing, but the style of the form is changing in response to your feedback over the last 12 months. And she'll set out the timeline and plan for the next CaBA reporting process. So I hope that makes sense. So to begin with, it's going to be some presentations from myself, and I will keep an eye on the time to prevent any tendency from me to go on too long. As if anyone knows me, that can be a risk. So my name's Nick Paling. I'm Director of Evidence and Engagement at West Country Rivers Trust. I'm also currently on secondment to South West Water as their stakeholder engagement manager, particularly in water resources, but also across natural resources management. And I have been chairing the CaBA Benefits Working Group since 2015 when we formed it, and been heavily involved in the design and development and delivery of the monitoring and evaluation process. So back in 2015, we had, I can still remember it very clearly, like it was yesterday, we had a CaBA get-together in London, in Westminster, and we had a strategic planning day for CaBA. And there was a lot of self-reflection, a lot of debate and discussion about what CaBA was, what CaBA had achieved, what was the strategic vision for CaBA going forward, what might we want to achieve in the future. And one of the things that came to light very quickly during those conversations was that there was an overarching feeling that the local environmental partnerships in general, of which CaBA catchment partnerships are a key type. The feeling was that they had been very successful, but at the same time, it felt like the approach of these local environmental partnerships was somewhat ad hoc. Lots of enthusiasm, lots of motivation, lots of amazing work being done. But we felt that we didn't really have a handle on what was being achieved and what the value proposition or value offer of these partnerships was. And it was felt that we needed to take a more strategic and dare I say it in inverted commas, business-like approach to the way that we delivered our partnerships. At the time, it was felt that we needed to develop a more compelling case for investment in the environment, but really it was more about developing a compelling case for investment in the partnerships, in our work as partnerships. And we needed to present it in a more compelling way to the right audiences, in the right places, in the right language, in order to get the results that we wanted. And I think the conclusion of that was that monitoring and evaluation clearly holds the key to success. It's monitoring and evaluation that allow us to show what we've achieved and to explain and demonstrate the benefits of our work. And I think also effective monitoring and evaluation supports adaptive management, and CaBA is supposed to be an adaptive approach. Monitoring and evaluation is how we learn. It's how we discover what works and what doesn't work, and it's how we then iteratively feed that learning back into our process in order to improve it and increase our chances of delivering the outcomes that we so desperately seek through our work. So this was a slide that I developed back then, which is, I was thinking about what am I trying to explain here, and the only way I could really explain it was by trying to think of Dragon's Den. In Dragon, and at the time we came up with this expression, you walk into Dragon's Den and you say, we are seeking proactive investment in some of the UK's environmental assets that will both protect and enhance their contribution to the value and resilience of our environment, or 5 capitals as we would call it then. Trying to get people to put themselves in the position of having to go and pitch for funding or backing or support or buy-in from stakeholders. And try and say, what evidence, what information do you need when you go into a situation like that, when you're asking for investment of time or money from somebody in order to be able to win the day, to win hearts and minds, to convince them to put their hand in their pocket or to get involved in your partnership. And actually change that slightly, because from a CaBA perspective, a catchment partnership perspective, what we're actually saying is we're seeking investment in our collaborative approach. and which delivers a significant contribution to the value and resilience of our 5 capitals. And so actually you're actually pitching not the environment, you're pitching your approach to restoring and working together to improve the environment. And which again is slightly different, because the benefits and the value you're selling are, in inverted commas, are different. So for me, this is all about, it all comes down to value. Benefits, yes, of course, but the value, and value is expressed in all sorts of different ways, and value is expressed by different people in different ways. People value things in different ways, some use money, some use other descriptors or metrics of value. So there's some key questions which we were trying to get people to think through in order to understand, develop a narrative about value of a partnership. For example, you need to be able to answer the question, what are you trying to actually achieve? What are your strategic goals? What is the product or service that you're actually selling, and who is the seller? Is it you, or is it somebody else? Is it about the 5 capitals, natural capital, social capital, etc.? Is it about environmental goods and services? And so you can see straight away it's about language as well as the who, where, and what. Who are the potential buyers of the thing that you're offering? What are they? What is it that they want? Are they interested in profits or money, or saving money, or reducing risk to them or their business or their community? Are they beneficiaries of what you're offering, or are they investing philanthropically or altruistically? Why would they invest in this thing? Why wouldn't they invest? Is it because they need this thing? Is it because they have a mandate or a statutory requirement to get more of this thing that you're offering? Is it a policy driver? Is it about competition? Is it because they want to get to beat the others to get this value? And I suppose most importantly of all, perhaps, why should they invest in this thing from you? Why is your offer different or better than anyone else's offer? How much confidence can you give them that there'll be a return on that investment? How much confidence can you give them through a compelling business case that you'll actually be able to give them the value, deliver the value to them that they seek? And I'm talking about this in quite business-like terms, but this is, this could be a conversation with a local community, or a big business, or another partnership, or a government agency. It doesn't have to be just business. We're talking about value and benefits in the broadest possible sense. And finally, what's the reward mechanism? So what does success actually look like? How do we evaluate? How do we demonstrate that we've delivered those benefits? And this lovely phrase that's been used, securitization of benefits. So how long will the benefits be delivered for? And how confident are we that they'll continue to be delivered long into the future? And the obvious example of that is things like carbon sequestration or habitat creation, tree planting, where someone might be investing in those benefits over a very long period of time. And if you don't get them for a very long period of time, then you probably won't invest, because what's the point? So you need to be able to have thought through these questions, these challenges, as you develop your narrative about value. So monitoring and evaluation are different, but they should be aligned and integrated to inform each other. So monitoring, and I'll explain a bit about what I mean by that. Monitoring is tracking what you're doing and what you're delivering. Evaluation is about the assessment and verification of the achievement of outcomes and impact and your objectives. But both in combination are vital for reporting, showcasing, marketing, impact assessment, building credibility with partners, stakeholders, iterative improvement, adaptive management, and so on and so forth. And the key thing here is it doesn't have to be complicated. Monitoring and evaluation is put forward often as something which is incredibly difficult or complex, but it doesn't have to be. It's more important that you have a logical process, a logical thought justification for what you're doing, how you're monitoring and evaluating it, and how you're demonstrating value delivery, impact delivery. So it's more important that you do something, even if it's just a thought process or a logical argument, to verify that what you're doing is good and effective and successful, rather than necessarily spending, breaking the bank on something ridiculously complicated. Or obviously, or the worst case scenario, not doing anything. So one key question is, who should undertake monitoring and evaluation, and what scale should they be done at? So I would argue that everybody should be doing monitoring and evaluation every day for everything that they do, in a very lightweight and you know, business as usual kind of way. But also there's the potential for certain groups like CaBA National, for example, to play a role in monitoring and evaluation. And that's exactly what we've done in terms of the benefits group for CaBA, is stepping in and saying, yes, each catchment partnership should be involved in monitoring and evaluation on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis, but also someone at a high strategic level needs to synthesize and gather all that information together so that we can report what the true collective value of CaBA as a movement is. So just a couple of examples of tools and techniques in and you know, some theories and concepts, if you like. So one of the ways that people undertake monitoring and evaluation, and particularly it can be supportive of a design process for designing not only interventions, activities, but also monitoring and evaluation as well, is to use a log frame. And this is an example of a log frame that I put together for an organisation, for West Country Rivers Trust, actually, a charity in this case. But you can use log frames for designing and monitoring and evaluating specific interventions, workshops, webinars, delivery of nature-based solutions projects, but also programs, organisations and partnerships. And so basically a log frame is a chain of events. It's quite linear, and that's one of the weaknesses of the process. But basically you say, what are the inputs? What are we actually going to do? What will the actions, the activities create? And in doing 1, 2 and 3 here, so inputs, activities and outputs, how will that translate into the short-term outcomes and the long-term goals that we're seeking to produce? And actually going through this process before delivering the intervention can be hugely beneficial in helping you to understand what it is you're doing. Why am I doing this? How will this activity translate into the outcomes that I seek? And how will I demonstrate that I've been successful and that I've achieved those outcomes? And indeed, how might I assess the value of those outcomes or impacts achieved over the longer term? So, you know, just as a worked example, this webinar, the activity is a webinar. The inputs are that we need 3 people to present it. We need Zoom, we need some money, time, we need all of your time. The outputs are the slides, the recording, the various other things that we produce along the way. Outcomes, hopefully a greater understanding amongst the audience of the benefits of monitoring and evaluation, long-term goals. Catchment partnerships get really excited about monitoring and evaluation, and the monitoring and the data gathered during the CaBA monitoring and evaluation process is more robust, and we get a much better picture of what CaBA is delivering nationally in terms of value and benefits. So you can see how a logic model kind of works. And you don't have to verify and evaluate every stage in the process because it's a logic chain. And other people you'll hear about talking about theory of change. So this is an example of a theory of change. Again, it's a bit linear. Theory of change isn't really supposed to be linear, but it just again, it's a theory of change is about analysing what you're doing, trying to work out what are we trying to achieve. So in this one, you can see awareness raising, attitude change, exchange of information, building collaborations. These are the enablers, the building blocks that you put in place. And if you can put those in place, and they can unlock other benefits like mobilization, behavior change, and indeed that can ultimately lead to the achievement of environmental outcomes, strategic goals, social outcomes, whatever. So it's just another way of imagining, thinking about how what you're doing delivers value and benefits. And then it helps you to understand how to work out how to evaluate or verify that you've been successful. So a theory of change combined with a log frame allows you to monitor and evaluate co-creation, and it really helps to demonstrate the impact and outcomes realized. This is just another graphic. You're going to see a lot of graphics from me today, unfortunately, for you. This shows the theory of change that I've shown on the previous slide down the left, but again, the engagement pyramid on the right. So this is another way of thinking about how we take people on a journey, in this case, through deepening engagement. So for taking 20,000 people who are connected with, inspired, and then deepening that engagement and moving them up ultimately to deliver our long-term goal, which is to create advocates or champions of the environment in our local community or area. I won't labour these points too much, but the other thing that I'm particularly interested in is evaluation of systems change. There's a huge area of research looking at evaluation of whole systems change. And the basic rule, I'll put this in because it's interesting, I think it's interesting, but how do you design evaluation? So first thing you need to do is know the system that you're trying to change, define the system, articulate a set of questions that will help you understand how change is happening within the system, determine what approaches have the capacity to change the system, and then use evaluation to verify whether or not the system has changed, and also use it as a catalyst for learning and decision making. And this diagram, the 6 conditions of systems change, for me resonates really strongly with CaBA as an approach, which is looking at policy change, practice change, resource flow change, and how that then delivers relationships and connections, changes in power dynamics, and transformative change in terms of the way people perceive the benefits or the value of things and their behavior, and so on and so forth. And I won't read all this, but I just love this quote: evaluation of systems change involves the systemic collection of relevant, credible and useful information for taking decisions and making pragmatic and strategic actions. Evaluation is not about methods, it's about reasoning. And that's what I would encourage you as a take home from today, if nothing else, is reflect and think about how you deliver value through your catchment partnership, and think about ways that you might demonstrate that. Okay, so time check. Wow. I'm on time. That never happens. So that was the first bit. So that's just a quick summary of some of the theories and concepts and ideas around monitoring and evaluation, and starting this process of trying to explain why I think it's so important that we all, either as individuals, within our organizations, within our catchment partnerships, and collectively as CaBA, really do try and improve and make more robust the way that we do monitoring and evaluation individually and collectively. So now I've got a presentation, which more for me, I'm afraid, which is, I'm just going to give you a quick, tell the story of the CaBA reporting process and where it's come from, but it's inextricably entwined with the history of CaBA, and it's basically sort of death by 25 diagrams, but I just use these diagrams to try and show the evolution of our thinking in terms of the CaBA reporting and evaluation process. But this is always about value. What's the value of CaBA? How does CaBA deliver benefits? How is CaBA different from other initiatives and programs that are operating in the environment and beyond out there? Where does CaBA sit in the landscape of local environmental partnerships? All these questions that we've had all along. So CaBA benefit assessment, design, and so this was the challenge that we had in 2015, which was we were told, right, you need you to design and deliver a monitoring and evaluation framework for CaBA. And this is basically the story of what we tried to do, and continue to try and do now. So back in 2005, when catchment partnerships first sort of were mooted as an idea, running through to when the CaBA national policy framework was launched, with the pilot catchments in between in 2011 and 12. The challenge for CaBA has always been, could it develop into an evidence-based, whole system, adaptive and participatory approach? And I think undoubtedly it has always had a lot of the signs that it is one of those approaches. But over the years, we've tried to put more and more evidence to justify that it is truly evidence-based and holistic in its approach, and adaptive and participatory. And this is really this is the core challenge of CaBA, since it formed. So back in the day, seems like a long time ago now, but it's probably about 10 years ago, when we first adopted the US EPA adaptive management, catchment management snake, as we call it. We spent a lot of time working on lots of projects with lots of different partners in 2011, particularly on the DEFRA Strategic Evidence and Partnership Project, trying to work out how catchment partnerships could align with this kind of process. And ultimately, we knew all along that they were perfectly aligned with it. But when we first started, we were always focusing on building partnerships and characterizing the catchments. And we started to realize that there were lots of benefits that catchment partnerships would deliver as you go through this process, this adaptive process. And each of those had huge value and huge potential benefit to the environment locally and nationally. And we started developing the language of catchment partnerships and the language of collaborative governance. We started using sort of buzzwords like shared understanding and common language and identifying pressures and targeting measures and predicting benefits and evaluating benefits. We didn't really think about that much at the time. And we were really trying to work out, how can this work? How do we make this work? How do we actually genuinely turn catchment partnerships into an adaptive catchment management approach? And then a few years later, we sort of condensed this idea that CaBA is an enabler and catalyst of co-creation of partnership working. And this is another diagram. There's a lot of diagrams, and I apologize. But, the idea of getting people together and then, these ideas on the side here, translation, it's about language, it's about listening, it's about engagement, yes, it's about persuading, it's about winning hearts and minds, it's about co-creation. And all of those, we do all those things, and bringing data and evidence to the table is about delivering local action, so practical implementation of environmental improvements. And then thinking about, well, what are the blockers? What are the things that stop that being effective? What are the things that stop that working? And then thinking from there, what are the things that are enablers of that? So the policy needs to be right. We need leadership. We need to have the technical capabilities. We need funding. We need to work in partnership, obviously, properly. We need to have a clear shared vision, and we need to have consensus around what the right things to do are and how we're going to do them. So again, I think CaBA started to emerge then as a real force, a real potential powerhouse in terms of delivering impacts. But we also knew at the same time that all CaBA partnerships were different, and some of these enablers were a lot harder to achieve and put in place than others. And we didn't really know enough about what was happening in order to put these enabling conditions in place. A lot of other people in CaBA said that, catchment partnerships, and the hosts particularly, are knowledge brokers, and people talked about science, policy, practice interface. This statement, CaBA aims to create an evidence base that facilitates local decision making, and must therefore take several factors into consideration. So the idea of catchment partnerships as a knowledge broker and integrating needs, wants, opportunities, and suitability in the landscape, in the catchment landscape. So again, another interesting model. Is it right? Is it wrong? Do we know enough about it? Do we actually know what CaBA looks like on the ground, and in terms of delivering some of these quite high level ideas and concepts? I think we saw very early in CaBA that it was about language. CaBA is about language. It's about talking to the right people in the right language to get their buy-in and support for what we're trying to do. And in terms of monitoring and evaluation, that's hugely valuable in that, because you need to be able to report what you're doing and what you're achieving in the right language to the right people in order to get their support, their buy-in, and possibly their investment. And we had a lot of cases early in catchment partnerships where people were presenting brilliant high value work to the people in the wrong language, or the wrong people in the right language, whichever, and not getting the results that they deserved to get in terms of investment or buy-in from key stakeholders. And so, then this is again another gratuitous diagram for me, but taking the adaptive management snake and really building that detailed understanding into it. Early in CaBA, we spent all our focus on building partnerships and characterizing our catchments. And then gradually over the years, we've won the right to move forward to setting goals, designing action plans, delivering restoration. And then what you see is that in any true adaptive cycle is that monitoring and evaluation is absolutely pivotal in the whole process, because if you don't monitor and evaluate, it can never be truly adaptive, because you're not learning, you're not iteratively improving what you're doing. And also you can't then go and disseminate, promote, showcase the value of what you're doing if you don't have a really good handle on what you're doing and what you've achieved and what you've delivered and what was successful, and also demonstrating, if you're saying that someone described adaptive management as a buzzword to me just this week. I don't agree with that. I truly believe in an adaptive management approach, but if it's not evidence-based, if you don't do monitoring and evaluation throughout the process, at every stage in the process, then you can't actually genuinely say that you are taking an adaptive approach, because you're just trying things and seeing what happens. And again, always coming back to these enabling conditions. What are the things that enable us to be successful in a catchment partnership? Do we understand them? Do we understand how they are enablers? Do we understand how they connect into our process? And are we therefore able to justifiably and genuinely say that they are in place or not? So in 2016, off the back of all of this thinking and talking and discussing and debating, it was becoming increasingly clear that effective monitoring evaluation was going to be critical for the iterative, collaborative, co-creation process that is catchment partnership working. And I've said this, I'm not going to apologize for saying it over and over again, but monitoring evaluation does really hold the key to success. It's how the successful realization of outcomes is demonstrated, and it's essential for adaptive action learning. So it was recognized that CaBA needed to establish its own monitoring and evaluation process for the movement collectively. And also alongside that, to try and build the capacity and the capability of the catchment partnerships to monitor and evaluate their own processes. So back then, while we felt that the partnerships were undoubtedly getting better at monitoring and evaluation, CaBA was, and still is to some degree, very output driven. So here's some money, go and deliver outputs, and then the number of outputs that we deliver are seen correlated with how successful we are, how much money we've brought in, and how many widgets we've delivered in the environment, or workshops or meetings we've convened. And I think that is really important, because that's part of our logic chain. But what it doesn't show is how those activities translate into benefits for the environment or for the communities that we're working in. So I think catchment partnerships were, and probably still are to some degree, although it's hugely variable across the movement, much less confident when it came to evaluating their collaborative co-creation processes, which it turns out are absolutely core to the CaBA approach. So back then, when the CaBA Benefits, the first thing the CaBA Benefits group did was working with Alex Collins from Imperial College, who was a DEFRA fellow at the time. She developed the logic model for CaBA, which is basically exactly the same as the other logic model that I showed you, which is what are the inputs, so things like money, human resource, technical resources, what are our processes, and just trying to, the process of disentangling CaBA and working out all the different bits and how those different bits of CaBA ultimately lead to the delivery of outputs, outcomes, and strategic goals. So the next diagram, so I deliberately didn't put this diagram up. So we've done, again, more talking, more. This diagram is not supposed to be, like intimidating. It's a bit complex, and I'm not going to try and explain it to you all now. But essentially, we're trying to work out how does CaBA deliver value, and the answer is that CaBA delivers value in all sorts of different ways, depending on which partnership you're in and which catchment you're in. Anyway, so I'm going to show this diagram. Don't be afraid. But I'll explain very quickly. So essentially, on the left, over to the left side there, CaBA is a collaborative approach. It's about bringing people and organizations together. And the reason it does that is because it wants to create two things, what we call knowledge capital. So this idea of shared understanding and information evidence of what the challenges and solutions are, for example, and also social capital. So that's, you bring people together because it allows you to create engagement, help build consensus, gives agency, creates an egalitarian or leveling off of power in the between the organizations. It builds trust, brokerage. All these things are social capital. And in creating that knowledge and shared knowledge and social capital, then CaBA can then be in a very strong position to develop a plan and also a mandate for action. And it puts it in a very strong position to generate money, investment in the environment. So that's the left side. That's the sort of the core business of CaBA day to day. Why does it do all that? Because then CaBA has the ability to catalyze delivery. So then organizations within the partnership can bring, with that money, can then take it and actually then deliver environmental, social, cultural, and economic benefits through the deployment of their natural capital toolbox, if you like. And all of those things culminate in the delivery of what the economists might call gross value added. So the totality of all the value of all the benefits that have been delivered through that process. And it is an adaptive, iterative process. So this is just one person's create, it's my flux capacitor. Made this diagram on the train on the way home from a CaBA meeting once. It's just trying to understand that CaBA delivers value in all sorts of different ways. And some partnerships focus very much on the right-hand side of this diagram, and many catchment partnerships focus primarily on the left side, and some try and do the whole thing. But you have, unless you understand what your catchment partnership is and what it's trying to do, and you evaluate and demonstrate the outcomes that you're delivering, and you iteratively improve and showcase what you're achieving, then while what you're doing is fantastic and has huge value, you aren't in a position to actually tell the world about it. So a simplified version of that is essentially co-creation is about creating knowledge and social capital, and using that to try and financial capital, and using it to deliver natural capital benefits. And I think catchment partnerships, it's fair to say, are very, very good at or getting better, I should say, at monitoring and evaluating the creation of environmental benefits through their work. But there's still a bit of a gap in terms of us capturing and recording and evaluating these critical other parts of what we do, which is creating knowledge capital, bringing evidence and information together and building a shared understanding of our catchments, and social capital, which undoubtedly we're doing a huge amount day to day. Business as usual is doing these things, but we're not very good at capturing the value of those things. And that means that CaBA doesn't necessarily get the recognition that it deserves in terms of delivering those outcomes. Quick time check. Okay, not too bad. So back in 2016-17, we created the first CaBA reporting and evaluation form. And this might, for any of you who remember that, this form caused quite a stir amongst the catchment partnerships. Wasn't particularly easy to fill in. It was based entirely on the logic model, the log frame, and it was felt weak. We're trying to capture all the information we needed to be able to collate and showcase the value of what CaBA was delivering on a national level, which, without doubt, then and probably still now, is unique in the world. To have a local collaborative movement with partnerships covering every square millimeter of the land. I've never been shown an example where that's happening anywhere else in the world. So we wanted to really capture that and showcase that unique delivery of value across the movement. And that has allowed us to provide reporting, and Rob's going to say a bit in a second about how we've used that information, but it's allowed us to inform the working groups that operate nationally. This was in relation to some farming and forestry engagement. It allows us to summarize the delivery of projects and activities and interventions, engagement activities, and it's allowed us to feed that data that we've gathered from the partnerships over the years into the log frame, into the logic model, and try and from there extrapolate the likely value and benefits that CaBA is delivering, because we understand quite well how certain activities deliver benefits either to the environment or social benefits or whatever. And also back in, well, it was in 2019-20, so as the COVID was arriving, the benefits group also undertook a brand perception survey, and this is just the outputs from that. Obviously, they're very detailed and you won't be able to see, but we felt it was really important to try and understand how CaBA as a brand, as it was understood by the stakeholders, the people who aren't in CaBA partnerships, or who are in CaBA partnerships but aren't hosts. What's their perception of CaBA and how it delivers value? And there's some really interesting information in here, and you can compare the perceptions of CaBA from people who are slightly to the side or outside of CaBA with what our perception of what CaBA is, based on the reporting and evaluation and all the thinking that we've done over the years. And there are some interesting correlations and there are some mismatches. So what that shows is that I think it reinforces my point that I made at the start, which is the way that CaBA is viewed from outside is different from the way that CaBA is viewed from the inside. And that must be because of a failure of CaBA as a collective to really explain and justify its value proposition and differentiate it from all the other things that are going on in our landscapes, in our environment. And so that gives us a real challenge to reinforce this message, which is that we need to get better collectively and individually at monitoring and evaluating and showcasing the value of what we do. And Emily asked me to present this. So this is the first look at the results from the last reporting period, so 21-22. There's a table on the top left there, which is also summarized, I think, in the chart, just giving the financial numbers, despite the fact that CaBA is so much more than about revenue generation. There is always a focus on revenue generation as an indicator of success, but it is only a small part of the narrative about CaBA delivering value. The thing about the financial monitoring is that it's easy, because it's actually quite easy, relatively easy, to monitor revenue generation amongst the partnerships. What's harder to evaluate is all of the other value and other benefits that CaBA delivers, which don't have an immediate, ready-to-hand financial number associated with them. So the social capital, the cultural benefits, and the environmental, some of the environmental benefits, which don't necessarily have an economic value associated with them. But nonetheless, the funding was up compared to the previous year. Non-government funding significantly going up, and an increase in the ratio. So the top right is the gearing ratio, which we often talk about, a lot of interest in that. But essentially, for every pound of directly invested by government, CaBA partnerships raise an additional £3, slightly higher than the previous year, although the previous year was a bit of a dip because of COVID. So without further ado, that's enough from me. Where's the time? How's the time looking? Oh, I'm 3 minutes behind. That shouldn't be too much bother. So I will now stop sharing my screen and hand over to Rob.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm just trying to share my screen whilst I talk. Not easy. Hopefully, can you all hear me, or someone confirm?
I can hear you, Rob, and
okay.
I can see your screen.
Yeah, I should
you're not yet sharing your slides. It's just in.
There you go.
Desktop mode.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Nick, and hi to everyone. Yeah, I'm Rob Collins. I work for the Rivers Trust, but I'm also chair now of the CaBA National Support Group. I've been for a year or so, and I've been involved in this reporting process from its inception, actually, as well, at least indirectly. So I'm interested to hear that evolution that Nick described. But I thought I'd just very briefly before the break give you some idea why all of this reporting process is so important to CaBA as a whole, and give you some idea and flavour of what we in the National Support Group do with that information. Who do we go engage with, and what are the messages we give, and what are the outcomes? And I think it's fair to say that this is the only mechanism we really have that provides an overview of CaBA in its entirety, the whole initiative across the whole of England, across border of Wales and Scotland as well. There are other piecemeal ways, but actually this is the only mechanism we have, the reports that you send in, to quantify the environmental, social and economic benefits that arise from CaBA. And as Nick said, we've kept that reporting pretty consistent in its format, or at least in the questions we ask, over the last 4 or 5 years. And aside perhaps 1 or 2 additional questions here and there, 1 or 2 we've taken away, it's been pretty consistent. And that's important because that enables us to determine the direction of travel. We can compare between years quite easily nowadays. And we can identify fairly easily areas that are progressing under CaBA, and likewise those that are perhaps stalling or lagging behind. So, for example, we've seen a steady rise in engagement with private business across the board, across CaBA nationwide, and that's also been reflected in terms of the proportion of funding from private investment, green infrastructure and so on, green investment, sorry, and so on, with perhaps a little bit of a dip through COVID for obvious reasons. But similarly, we've also recognised that and this has always been the case actually, that partnerships do very little in terms of work around groundwater projects, very little groundwater delivery for one reason or another. And we can, and another example that Nick touched on, actually, we report sort of environmental benefits pretty well, social benefits okay, economic benefits not so well. So that these are all areas where we can, as a support group, go in and say, right, actually, we can give more support to partnerships through, guidance or webinars or whatever it might be. But I guess, standing back from it, the key issue here is our ability to champion CaBA to key stakeholders, the minister of the day, key policy leads in government, water companies, local authorities. It's across the board, across society, really. And you'll probably have all recognized and seen this infographic before. We produce this every year. So we take all that information, it's a royal we, Emily does this, and produce a comprehensive report each year. But actually, no minister of the day will read a comprehensive report. They will read a one-page infographic that captures CaBA in a nutshell with some killer stats. And you can see them there on last year's infographic. So you can see that figure of, and one real key one is around the economics. Nick's right, it's not all about the economics, but Treasury get involved in looking at this sort of stuff, and they do care about the economics. And the fact that we're able to say each year that CaBA broadly multiplies that core funding, that 15K each partnership gets, and multiplies it into somewhere between 2 and 3. So this figure here you're seeing is sort of COVID impacted, 2 point something. And now, by the looks of it, we're rising back up to 3 again, which is good news. But each year, partnerships are delivering that. And this, by the way, is non-governmental funding. So we're quite cold and hard about this. We're saying, we're not even going to include governmental funding. So we've got some clear economic benefits, or where partnerships are successfully securing funding from a diverse range of sources, turning that into environmental benefits on the ground, and a huge amount of social capital built as well. And we've, as the headline here on this slide says, we've reached 10 years of CaBA now, if you include the first pilot phase. And we will be doing something to celebrate that, probably in the autumn now. But one of the reasons we've hung in there with CaBA, and it is a pain. We only ever seem to secure funding year by year, but we still managed to do it for a decade now, and so much of that comes down to the fact we can produce material like this infographic that is underpinned by the reporting that the partnerships provide. It's that, it really is gold dust. It's that important. And it means also that when we go off and champion CaBA to key folk, just going back a step, I mentioned mentioning the CaBA to ministers. Their, attention time span is pretty limited. That infographic is gold dust in that sense. So a few years ago, we put it under the nose of Michael Gove, and literally the next day we secured funding for CaBA at a time when it was looking pretty dicey. And we do that each year. And we're also able then to, through the reporting process, have confidence in some of the messages we're giving. So we know from the reporting that increasingly CaBA is really delivering on nature-based solutions, and we can talk about the multiple benefits they provide, climate resilience and all the rest of it, and the fact that they're increasingly funded by private investment. But we can say this with confidence because we've got the numbers to back it up. Similar story with social capital, and here CaBA really is impressive. The engagement of partnerships with their local community groups, volunteer opportunities, citizen science opportunities. Again, we've got the numbers to back it up. We're not just speculating about this when we go and talk to the minister or policy leads in DEF or whoever it might be. And catchment plans are critical. This is all we do ask about these in the reporting, of course. And this is a big win that each partnership does have a plan, and increasingly story maps and information platforms and so on. And incidentally, we are going to go, we're beginning a process of making sure those plans are as up to date as they can be and are on the website. So if you think yours is not, or could do with a an upgrade or whatever it might be, or you're not sure if the link's still active, please check that out and update that, because this is key stuff too we can champion. And I guess really what I'm saying is the reporting processes are also underpinned a gradual increase in the soft power, if you like, of CaBA and the legitimacy. And there's some examples here. So this is the Environmental Audit Committee on water quality recommendations, and report came out about a year ago. And that, you can read this, this will be recorded and you read this slide later, so I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it flags or suggests that very strongly that ministers should consider increasing the funding and resources available to partnerships. So these are, a committee of politicians who are recognising the value, recognise the importance of local authorities to CaBA, and they should have strong engagement and catchment partnerships nationwide, and recommending that government should consider whether requirements should be placed on water companies to respond to citizen science undertaken by CaBA partnerships. And that's proved an insightful one, because last year Thames Water announced they'd invest £5 million in catchment partnerships across the Thames River Basin district. That was announced for a 5-year period, about another 4 years of that to run. And also last calendar year, we had the Casco successful Casco project that kicked off. So this is £7 million worth, several water companies involved in this, a huge number of stakeholders involved, including 8 demonstrator catchments around catchment partnerships based on citizen science. How can we, take that weight of evidence and move it all forward? So real significant developments. And this one that came out just last week, the Environmental Improvement Plan, that government plan, sort of builds on the 25-year environment plan, and again flags the importance of the catchment-based approach, driving multiple benefits, states that therefore will support partnerships for greater integration of water management, framework for going forward, and so on. So really good stuff, and again, it's all underpinned by the reporting we receive from you partnerships. We understand, there's a bit of a burden to fill it out and to do it well, but hopefully this gives you a flavour of why it's so important, and how and why it's been instrumental in CaBA receiving funding for a decade now, which is unprecedented, really, from DEFRA and the agency. And just one last example. This is a bit of a long shot, I think, but we've been speaking to special advisors to Minister Powell and Therese Coffey about whether we can't just get a name drop at least of CaBA at the UN Water Conference coming up in March in New York. And the rationale being that Nick said he thought CaBA is globally unique. It is globally unique. It remains globally unique. You can find examples of collaborative water management elsewhere around the world, of course, but nowhere else can you find full coverage at a river catchment scale across the whole of the country. So in that respect, it is globally unique. And that's one of the messages we've been saying to government, that you can go to the UN Water Conference, and if you read the goals of the conference, it's all about collaborative water management, local community engagement, development goals, of course, as well. But CaBA fits into this so well. We may not even get a mention, but the point I wanted to make is, again, in our engagement with the special advisors to the ministers, we've virtually at least put that infographic under their noses, and that infographic is underpinned by all the reporting you guys send each year. So hopefully that's given you a flavour as to why it's so important to get all of this information as well as you can on time to us. It really is gold dust. That's the key message, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Okay. Let me just pick back up. Where was I? Okay, so that was really great from Rob. I think when I presented earlier, I was talking about the log frame or the logic chain for CaBA, where we're trying to work out over all those years what do we do? How does what we do translate into benefits, and what are our long-term goals? What are we trying to achieve? And I think Rob summarized really nicely how we're starting to see some of the signs of being successful, but through the CaBA monitoring and evaluation, but obviously that's so vicarious on the success of CaBA as a movement, showcasing more and more the value and the benefit of what it does, and getting key people to understand that. And I just wanted to I also picked up on this because the environmental improvement plan, which obviously is the latest iteration of the 25-year environment plan, has this section in it which just says what Rob quoted as saying: catchment partnerships such as catchment-based approach drive multiple benefits. DEFRA will support catchment partnerships. I think this is an endorsement of everything that the catchment-based approach has achieved over the years, because this is what we've been working towards, is to get recognition that catchment partnerships are an essential, pivotal component of the approach to nature recovery and environmental improvement in this country. So that made me pleased anyway. So now we're going to take a short break. We are slightly behind. That's okay. Let's take a break. We probably only need 5 minutes, don't we? God, it hasn't been that long. So let's say that we'll still reconvene at 10:35, which gives you a very generous 8 minutes to make a brew, put the kettle on, etc. So please rejoin us at 10:35, and we'll be handing over to Emily primarily to talk about the monitoring and reporting process. Thank you, everybody. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully everyone has returned, and we will press on with through our agenda. I wanted to, just before we hand over to Emily, I just wanted to, there's been a couple of good points raised in the chat and in the Q&A. So Sarah asked about, with regards to funding, how do we attribute funding to different organisations and differentiate this from CaBA raised funds? So I'm hopeful that Emily's presentation will give some insight into that. But I think the key thing to say there is that we don't attribute funding at all, really. We rely on the returns, that the information that's filled in the form, and the catchment partnerships, the hosts particularly who fill in the form, are responsible for attributing funding to different sources and apportioning that across the different years. So that's all included in the guidance note for the form. But yeah, so we rely on accurate reporting of funding by the partnerships, because we don't know where any of the funding has come from. But Emily is available to provide guidance and support in relation to that. Is it easy to make an infographic? Yeah, I would say so. I think anyone can, with things like tools like Canva and various other tools which are available these days, it's actually reasonably straightforward to design infographics. I'm sure that most partnerships will have someone with a slightly designery, artistic leanings within their partnership. Find the resource, find the capability within your partnership for someone who's got an enthusiasm for design and infographics. So the other 2 points that were made were about championing. One was championing CaBA to ministers is great, but the actual amount of financial support received has not increased, and so it's a funding cut in real terms, which is undoubtedly correct. And another one in the Q&A, a Rivers Trust colleague saying,
Nick, can I just comment on that one a second?
Yeah.
It is a cut in real terms, of course, but we came very close just before COVID to securing a longer term agreement and more money. So it's a constant battle. And yeah, yes, it is a cut, but the fact we're still 10 years on, we're still here and still getting that money. But there are lots of opportunities, and we are always pushing business cases for a step change in that funding. We came close to being quite achieve it.
I think the key point there is CaBA still exists. I think that's another thing that makes CaBA quite unique in the world, is that for a local collaborative governance approach, especially with the coverage that it has, it's unprecedented for it to persist for so long. So I think whilst the fact that funding hasn't gone up is a negative, as Rob says, that we have come very close to having that increase, but also we haven't had it removed, which was always a risk at the start of CaBA. And I think that's again a testimony to the fact that CaBA is so good at getting better at showing people the value of itself. The comment in the Q&A about the lack of integration between CaBA and other policies like local nature recovery strategies and NFM programs, I think that is undoubtedly also true, but huge amounts of work going in to try and break down some of those silos and to get better integration. I think that the DEFRA backing of CaBA in the 25-year environment plan brings forward the time when local nature recovery strategies have to incorporate collaboration with CaBA partnerships. It is happening, but it's very patchy and it's at different stages. I think very quickly, Emily.
Nick, can I just jump in again there? Sorry, we have a working group with DEFRA, Natural England, and CaBA for exactly this reason, trying to better integrate CaBA, point out the benefits, not to try and get CaBA to take over local nature recovery. It shouldn't be, but point out the benefits of synergies between the two. Point out the CaBA data set can play a really important role. And we're finally getting somewhere. But DEFRA created, with Natural England local nature recovery without remembering that they created CaBA. So for 18 months, we've been battling from a position of no understanding to beginning to get somewhere. But we recognise the issue and we're working on it.
Yeah, and so one thing I just wanted to add before Emily comes in was I think the best, if you want to know, if you're stumped as to where to start with monitoring and evaluation and how to do it, I would recommend there are two things. One, do a SWOT analysis on your catchment partnership. You can do one for CaBA as well, actually. And a SWOT analysis, if you don't know, is analysing all the strengths and weaknesses of your thing, in this case, your catchment partnership, and also thinking of all the opportunities and threats. And that's such an amazing thought process to go through, especially if you do it collaboratively with your partners. What are we good at? What are we bad at? And I always say it. The best thing about CaBA, its biggest strength, is that all the catchment partnerships are different and uniquely tailored to their own catchments. And the biggest weakness of CaBA is that all of it as a movement is that all the catchment partnerships are different. But the other thing is the threats. So threats is where you consider externalities. And I think that this obviously resonates with these comments that people have made about, the funding and integration. There are lots of externalities that have influenced and impacted CaBA positively and negatively. COVID, as Rob said, had a big impact on the movement, but also politics, dare I say. These things all have an influence on your catchment partnership and its operation and its delivery of success and CaBA as a movement. So the other thing is that there is, on the CaBA website, there is a guide to evaluation of a catchment partnership, and it has a really excellent self-reflection section in it. And I'll put the link in the chat so that everybody can have a look at that. It's much underused and very useful resource, developed a few years ago by the Benefits Group, working with partners. Emily, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen quickly.
Emily, you're quite quiet, so I don't know if you make sure that you
shout. Can you hear me better now?
Still a bit quiet, but speak it in your most robust voice and I'm sure it'll be fine.
Morning. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so yes, my name's Emily and I do some of the background stuff for the collating the reports and the monitoring forms and putting together the report, which I took over a couple of years ago from Rosie, who some of you may have spoken to in the past. So today I'm just going to run through some changes that we've made to the monitoring form for the next reporting period based on feedback.
Emily, sorry, you are really quiet. We've had a few people struggling to hear. Okay. Is there a way that you can increase your microphone on?
Can I just go on mute and pick up my headphones for a second? It'll be better. One sec.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's all right. So we'll just give Emily a few seconds just to get her technical things sorted out. We desperately need everybody to hear what she has to say. I'm quite happy to fill for a few minutes. Please, so if you do have any questions or observations, then please don't hesitate to put them in the chat or the Q&A. It also occurred to me that if after the presentation today that you think that you perhaps want to get some more support or need more support in monitoring and evaluation in all of its various guises, and indeed filling in the form, there are resources available to offer support. I've always said that I'm happy to offer support, training, guidance in any way that I can. There are lots of resources out there that could help you develop your monitoring evaluation plans. Andrew has said in the Q&A, who is Emily? So I did introduce her at the start, but if you missed it, so Emily is a data and evidence officer at West Country Rivers Trust, who is responsible for delivering all of the background work on the CaBA monitoring and reporting form. She develops the infographic and the report, and also produces the form each year that is to send out to you, which is what she's going to talk to you about now.
I can't get my headphones to work. So I'll try and shout. Can you
lean right into the microphone and I'm sure it'll be fine.
I'm sorry. I will, Well, I'll try and shout. So thanks, Nick. I can't get my headphones to work, so I apologise if I am quite quiet. Hopefully in the recording, you'll be able to turn the volume up and hear more. And if not, you can also get in, if you have any other questions or something isn't covered or you can't hear, you can always get in contact with me as well. So yeah, I'll try my best. So we're going to run through the form today and have a look at some improvements from previous years. Oh, it's all going really well now. Hold on a second. 1 second. Nick, my screen stopped working. All going swimmingly. Can I?
Do you want me to? Do you want me to take over?
Yeah, sorry, I can't share my screen anymore either. I'm really sorry about this. Can you take over?
I'm happy to. It might not be very good, but I'll do my best.
If you want to just share and I can talk form. Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll share. Oh, that's good. That's a good idea. I'll share the slides and then you talk. It was never going to go perfectly, was it?
Okay, thank you. So we received some feedback. The form had a bit of a revamp in 2021-22 reporting, and we included some macros to try and improve the process. But based on more feedback after that, we have actually made some further changes to this year's form. So we've removed the project form tab that's been removed completely out of it. And that has also meant there's no need for any macros to be used anymore. So there were some issues with some organisation security policies for having macros. So they've gone completely too. So it is just simply gone back to a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet in the way we gather it. So I can't actually show you the form now, but what I will do is I'll put together a little recording of the form, and I can distribute that out to everybody as well. So you will still get to see the form, hopefully over the next few days. So we'll do that. Can you move to the next slide? So the form is made up of 5 separate tabs. 2 of them are more instructions, so the introductions and the notes tab will give you an insight on how to fill in the form and what kind of information should be included in each of the questions. So the introduction tab is if you can start here, because it does give you some key information about what should and shouldn't be put or reported each year. The key thing really being that we're trying to avoid double counting. So to avoid counting for partnerships, if it's multiple catchment partnerships, just to separate that into individual partnerships, and also not to report the same funds year on year. So that's a key thing throughout the form. So if we can try and avoid that, that would be very helpful and useful for me. The notes tab is also very useful. There's against each question that has a note, there's a little asterisk in the on the actual tabs that you will complete part 1, 2, and 3. So if there is a question about that, you can go to the notes tab. The notes tab also has some useful examples in some of the questions too. So if you're not quite sure on what to include or how it should be answered, there are some useful examples within there. So yeah, I think that's it for that one. Next tab, next slide, please. Okay, so part 1, we'll just looking at your partnership. So it's broken down into 7 different sections to make it hopefully easier to answer. If you've seen this form before, this really hasn't changed from last year, this section. So yeah, it will be the same if you haven't seen it before. It's just information purely about the partnership. And one thing just to note on that, the unique code for your partnership is, we introduced that last year, and it really does help me manage the number of forms that come in and looking for and managing just the process for the forms as well. So this year, well, the idea is to send out a link to a document so each partnership can cut their own code and just pop it in here. If you had yours from last year, it'll actually be the same. So yeah, so hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to find this year than it was last year. So yeah, as I said, this is broken down. This tab, first tab of the form, is broken down to 7 different sections, and most of this information can be summarised from like partnership meetings and things like that, the number of people engaged, and so it should be hopefully fairly okay to answer these questions. Yeah, so we go to part 2. Yeah, part 2. Okay. So part 2 is all about the Environment Agency's national success measures, and this is linked to the funding. So it's a place where you can demonstrate that you're meeting particularly NSMA and C, and then B is report is met through the filling of the form and another reporting form as well. So this is the place where you can demonstrate that. So there's 3 parts for NSMA, and they're all linked to engagement and how the partnership is engaging. And then the second one is NSMC, and that is the opportunity to report on the self-evaluation exercises undertaken. It's important this tab is filled in again because it is to the funding for the partnership. Yeah, next one, thanks. Okay, so this is actually part 3, which is project information. So this is probably the most complex part to fill in because it is based on this is individual project information that goes in here, so it may be more difficult to collate all that information from the whole partners in the partnership. But this is where a lot of the key information that can be reported comes from, and funding and things like that. So it is a very important part of it. So it is good if it can be filled in as thoroughly as you possibly can be. As I said earlier, only include the figures for the year that you're reporting. So if it's 22, 23, so only include the figures that correspond to that year. And if they've been previously reported, then please don't put them in, because then we will be double counting funding. You can split funding. So if you've got a pot of funding for a whole project, you can put that in year on year, split down per year, and that can be also split between partnerships as well. Question that Sarah had earlier about the funding categories. This is an important question in the form. This is how we break it down and create that ratio. So it is important to fill that box if you're reporting funding, to complete that. Otherwise it does result if it's empty, or then I have to come back and ask questions so we can get an accurate reporting of that. So that's a really important part of it, and that is how we break that. We create that ratio is based on this question. In the form as well, there are some places to report hectares, kilometres. If you can report, just check the unit that it's asking at the question and report in that unit. That's also extremely helpful. And there's a box for description when reporting on engagement. So if you can put a justification, or make sure those justifications are as complete as possible when filling in those elements of it. It's a shame I can't show you exactly what I mean, but as I said, I will put together something and send it around. We should cover all of these things for you. Over the few years, there's some questions on outcomes for equality, diversity, inclusion, as well as socio-economic outcomes. That has been somewhat overlooked in previous years' reporting. So where possible, if you can capture this and include it in the outcomes, that would be really helpful. As for Rob and what Rob and Nick said, is that we can demonstrate the impact and the value of the partnerships as a whole in the reporting process. Yeah, okay, thanks, Nick. Next slide. So just a few handy tips for summarising project data, because it can there's a lot of information to be recorded, but basically year on year, the project information, the questions that are asked won't actually change, because we want to be able to compare them year on year as well. So if you can start collating next year's data based on last year's monitoring form as a guide for the following year. So if you want to gather information over the year with partners in the partnership, you can actually do that based on the previous year's monitoring form and questions in there. The notes pages also provide an indication of what kind of questions will be asked as well. So that could be a good place if you wanted to start thinking about the next year's reporting, would be to look at that as well and have a good understanding of that. So it can be, looking at the form, it can be time consuming to complete. But if you do record the information and gather the information throughout the year, it may improve the process. And as I said, you can use the previous year's form as a guide for that. So there's a basis for being able to collect that collect the information over the year. Might be that you want to produce a simple monitoring and evaluation plan within the partnership, which may help in the reporting process when it comes to filling in the report at the end of the year. And as I said earlier, some of the information can actually be captured in the minutes of the partners meeting as well. So there's ways of hopefully minimising the impact and time commitment to fill in the form. And next slide, please. So just a bit of a timeline for what's coming up. By the end of February this month, we should have sent out the next year's monitoring form, which will be for the period, the financial year 22-23. So that will be ready for the end of financial year in March. So that form will be relevant then. So you can start when it's sent out, you can start filling that one in. So while this year's reporting is just to start, this financial year's starting to pick up, last year's report will be collated and the infographic will be put together. So by April, that will all be done for the previous financial year. So that's 21-22. And that'll be, I think Rob will send that out in April. Then another key deadline for the reporting is the 1st of July. So this will be when the 2022-2023 financial year report, the current reporting period, the form will be due on that date. So if we can get it all sent back by that date, that helps enormously. And then the information from that report submitted in July will be then fed into the report which is published in April 2024. So we gather all the information now, but the report comes out in the following year because it takes time to put everything together. Yeah, I think that's it, Nick, on that one. Yeah, okay, so I think it's just, there may be some questions. I can see there's quite a bit of chat. So yeah, questions on that. I do apologise about the technical.
Thanks, Emily. I'm going to talk really quietly, just in case everyone's got their volume on max, because now otherwise it will be, now I'm going to be deafening people. So yeah, with the benefit of the captions, which worked really well, I think we got everything. But obviously, if people did struggle to hear what Emily was saying, then obviously this session has been recorded and that will be made available along with the captions. And generously, Emily offered to record. Perhaps you could record your section of the webinar again separately with the demonstration of the form as well, and we can circulate that as a sort of a guide of how to, so people can catch up with what you just told them, but also get that guidance part. The demonstration of the form will be hugely useful, I think, as well. So if you could do that, Emily, that'd be fantastic. Let me stop sharing. Once you have the captions on, it's difficult to turn them off.
Do you want to leave them on?
No, yes, each person can switch them on for themselves. But anyway, so that actually brings us to the end of the agenda, but it's 11 o'clock, which is when we intended to finish. But I'll just have a quick look at the Q&A just to see where we've got to with that. So Gina, what's the code on the report form. So as Emily said in her presentation there, which we might not have heard, but to make it easier to process the forms, the returns as they come in, Emily has allocated each partnership a unique code which goes onto your form so that she can track it and correspond with you about it, and obviously track your data. Gina says we have shared hosting, and her change in co-host, can we check that they get the right code? So Emily, yeah, so if you could, so the key thing is if you have any questions like that, then Emily is your person to speak to. Bear in mind, please, that there are 104 catchment partnerships, and Emily is in constant communication with nearly all of them. So various things like codes and things will come out in general circulation. So yeah, so just bear in mind that Emily is a team of one working on all of this. So while she's very happy to answer questions and offer support, as we all are, yeah, try not to crush her under the weight of inquiries.
Nick, on that, yeah, if you can hear me, the when the form comes out, I hope that a separate document link will come out with the code so people can click through.
Okay, fair enough. Gina also says, can the report basis for 23-24 be agreed ASAP so we know through the year what each report? So this is absolutely critical to what Emily said, is that the questions in the form don't really change, if at all. Only the national success measures really change, but the bulk of the questions in if not all of the questions in the rest of the form remain exactly the same. So there's absolutely no reason why you can't capture information that goes into the form throughout the year. Emily did say in her presentation there are lots of different ways that you can fill in the form. Some partnerships do keep records of activities through the working year, and then enter that register of activities into the form at the end of the year, which is perhaps the most straightforward way of doing it. Many partnerships, however, do forget about the form until the very end of the reporting process and then try and fill it in all in one go. From experience, I would say that is not an easy way of doing it, because you'll find that if you haven't been gathering information throughout the year, you won't have the information you need to fill into the form. So this is why the whole presentation for the first hour was about emphasizing the importance of having a simple and effective monitoring and reporting process for your partnership. If you have one, a monitoring and evaluation plan for your partnership, and you deliver it, then there is absolutely no reason why it won't be very easy to transfer that information into the form at the appropriate time. My perhaps naive way of doing it has been in the past, or would, and certainly would be now, is if you have regular meetings of your partnership and you have a standing agenda, you should have a standing agenda item which is to get reports from each of your partners on what they've delivered in that quarter or month or however often you meet. If you capture what they say in the minutes of the meeting, then by the end of the year, the minutes of your regular meetings will stand as a record of exactly what you've done as a partnership, and you can transfer that into the form. But that's just how my brain works. I can't always collect data from some partners to the level you require. Would you prefer I guesstimate or leave out an activity altogether? I would personally challenge that. I think that partners should, in signing up to be members of your partnership, they sign up to the terms of reference of that partnership, and part of that should be, if they get the benefits of being in the partnership, that they might be expected to provide information back into the partnership on what they're doing and how they're contributing. I appreciate that it's not always easy, but that's sort of kind of CaBA is a bit of a social contract. But while I would emphasize that it is kind of a social contract, it's not just a free-for-all where everyone can tap in and get the benefits of being in a partnership without actually giving anything back to it. So that comes down to the governance and the arrangements within your partnership of how you establish your partnership and the rules of engagement that people work to. But that's all part of the process of forming and establishing and running a partnership. So Patricia, the timeline is in the slides that Emily presented. So hopefully you can review that when we circulate the slides and the recording. And Claire's just answered that. So the deadlines. So we have had hard deadlines over the years for the submission of the returns. I don't think ever in the history of CaBA reporting have we ever had everybody meet the deadline for various reasons, that particularly in the COVID years. We've been very relaxed about it. I think there are a lot of people in the benefits group and in the national group who would like us to be a bit more rigid in the deadlines, but we are adaptable and flexible to a certain extent, and so there is, and we are very happy to help and support in any way that we can with completing the form, because of all the reasons we've said about why it's so important that we actually go through this process collectively. The reason that, as Rob described, the value of this process is for CaBA as a movement is significant, and therefore we're all invested in trying to get everybody making contributions to the overall information. If you leave information out, if you can't report certain information, then that's fine, but it means that information won't be fed into the totality of the value and benefits of CaBA collectively, and that means that we'll be presenting an underestimate of the true impact and value of CaBA. So that's why we're here to try and support. And people have said in the past that CaBA is only as strong as its weakest link. Well, I don't think that's actually true, but if catchment partnerships are struggling for whatever reason, particularly with the reporting process, then we all have a vested interest in helping and supporting those partnerships to undertake that process, because they're undoubtedly probably delivering real value for their partnership and for the movement collectively. So I would love to have a conversation, perhaps a separate workshop about the efficacy / usefulness of kilometres enhanced, but perhaps not now. I think the Environment Agency are the holders and owners of that metric, and there are methods established for how to calculate it, but catchment coordinators are the key people to talk to if you want to have a discussion about kilometres enhanced, because in theory, and the guidelines for the reporting form express this, the host should be working with their catchment coordinator to work out and agree what the kilometres enhanced value is for their catchment over that year, and that's what goes on the form. So hosts shouldn't be really trying to calculate that on their own. It's and nor should catchment coordinators really be calculating it on their own. It should be a conversation, a collaboration between the hosts and the catchment coordinator to work out what the correct metric for kilometres enhanced is.
Can I just add to that, Nick, as well? There's next to that question, there's a description. It's also really useful for me if that description can be filled in each time. So that's reported for each project. Hopefully we've got that. Okay.
Good. Right. Yes. So without further ado, the plan was to finish at roughly 10, but obviously we wanted to have a bit of Q&A. Sarah has asked, can I ask a question verbally, please? And so that's not in my control. Rebecca, is it possible for Sarah to ask a question?
Oh, yeah, one sec.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, I'm really new. I'm a catchment coordinator for the Wensum Catchment Partnership. I'm pretty new to the whole process. We have a new Cameo catchment coordinator as well. We're trying to set up a group of catchment coordinators so we can talk to each other. The problem is knowing who can we contact to talk about this? I mean, for me in particular, it's pretty new. I would really like to be able to actually have a chat to somebody about CaBA monitoring, and I completely agree with the whole idea of monitoring and evaluation, and log frames and all the rest of it. I'm trying to do that with our CaBA partners, but there's a lot of pragmatic issues that are not covered in the monitoring and evaluation. So what you're showing in a sense is the end product, but I'm also at the kind of beginning with my CaBA members at literally setting up a coordinated, integrated log frame, action plans, whatever you want to call it, so it's really difficult to get people's emails, contact numbers, whatever it is, to actually find somebody to say, well, where do I go to have these conversations? Or is there an existing CaBA coordinator network that we can join as coordinators? Yeah, so that's kind of my question is, what are the contacts and support? Is there already in existence a working group? Is there something on Slack that we can join? It's just basically, as a newbie, where is all the information?
Yeah, so Sarah, your internet was not so good towards the end, but I got the gist, and actually the captions captured it perfectly. So the answer to your question is yes, all of that support exists, all that information exists. So one of the things that makes CaBA so special is the national support group and the working groups and all of the mentoring programs and information and support that's been provided to catchment partnerships as they go forward on their journeys. It sounds so catchment partnerships it's adaptive management. So what's emerging is that catchment partnerships do go through these cycles of reinvention and refresh and new people come on board, and then there's the challenge of adapting and reigniting the process. The CaBA website is a huge resource of all of that learning and guidance, and in addition, the National Support Group led by Rob and many others in the Rivers Trust and in other organisations and in the working groups are all there to empower and help and support catchment partnerships as they go through on their journey through the adaptive process of catchment management and catchment partnership working. So you're very welcome to get in touch with me or Rob, I'm sure, and he will point you in the direction of key people to talk to. But
how do I do that? Sorry, how do I get in touch with you? I don't have an email address for you even. I'm just wondering if there's how do I get in touch?
So you can contact the CaBA generally through the CaBA website, or you can, Rob's put his email in the chat, so you can send him an email and he will, like I say, point you in the right direction of everybody. You're very welcome to have my email address as well, but Rob's probably the best person to start with.
Thank you very much.
Excellent, no problem at all. So the whole point of CaBA is that it exists to support all of the CaBA partnerships, and the reporting process is just one tiny part of that, but the National Support Group with its working groups is absolutely huge, and the website, I think the CaBA website is massively undervalued in itself. Huge amounts of information and guidance that of huge value, going right back with case studies to the very start 10 years ago. I won't take any more of your time. Just thank you very much to everybody who's come along. There will be a recording circulated where hopefully some sort of boost has been put on Emily's volume so that you can all hear her dulcet tones more clearly. But yeah, so other than that, you're very welcome to get in touch with us through the pre-mentioned channels. And Emily's put in the chat the email address for CaBA reports at wrt.org.uk, which is the correspondence address for if you want to talk to Emily or ask questions of Emily about the reporting process itself. So without further ado, I wish you very good Wednesdays, and yeah, look forward to getting all your information and returns in the CaBA form later in the summer. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you.